Welcome back for episode 8 of It's Expensive But Is It Good? Today we are taking on Mega Man 5 on the NES. How does it play on its own, but also how does it compare with the rest of the series, especially when compared to the highly regarded original trilogy? It wasn't that long ago when we fully covered Mega Man 1, 2, and 3, not just on the 8-bit originals, but also on their lesser-known 16-bit Sega ports as well. Mega Man is nothing short of a classic gaming icon, and really it all began right here, and it's really important to reflect on what I believe everybody can agree is great Mega Man action. Mega Man 1 being a solid start to the series, with its 6 Robot Masters and challenging road to Dr. Wily, with some solid graphics and excellent music. Mega Man 2, as many know, is one of the most highly regarded NES games of all time, and it really did make itself more approachable with less severe difficulty while cranking the quality dial up even further with its overall audio and video design. Plus it started what became the standard 8 Robot Masters and had a memorable final road to Wily, where we get to see his fortress for the first time. Mega Man 3 is often debated as up there with Mega Man 2, and it's a heated one, where many people are willing to argue either way. Often Mega Man 2 seems to have the edge from the crowd, and that's because it definitely has a lot of great things going for it. It continued the 8-bit rock show that had become established as the Mega Man bar of excellence. Its graphics continued to improve, the levels were longer. Mega Man 3, you had a new sidekick that evolved from simply named Item 1, Item 2, and Item 3, now into the Rush Coil, Rush Jet, and Rush Marine. It also added a key mechanic that cannot be overlooked with how it speeds things up and changes your overall gameplay with the new option to slide. They even brought back all 8 Mega Man 2 bosses reincarnated, which is truly a labor of love, and once it's finally all over, the game really has you feeling complete. An important thing to mention, Mega Man 3 is the longest of that classic series, which is a double-edged sword. You could sell the concept as being more for your money, which it objectively is, but it's important to recognize that the game is noticeably more difficult than Mega Man 2, certainly compared to its normal mode to say the very least, and it may wear some players down with its lengthy checkpoints and numerous levels to finish off. All 3 of them are known to be anywhere from good to legendary, depending on who you ask. So now, let's take a look at this '92 release to see how good the most expensive Mega Man is on the NES. I'm Jeff, and this is Marmax Gaming. Mega Man 5. Let's really allow ourselves to take this game in by starting with its theme and title screen, complete with Proto Man's scarf, and they don't hesitate at all before hitting you with another sick Mega Man track. Now we're going to do what a lot of players do, and that's stop right here and analyze the stage select screen. You have 8 new Robot Masters to take on, and honestly, they all look pretty cool. I certainly don't notice or feel like anything is off about the lineup. Let me tell you why. The mugshots are nice, the music has great energy, and the names are just fine. Most importantly, certainly nothing lamer than anything that's come before it in the series. I've heard rants about the later Robot Master names in the series from people that will go on and then say their favorite in the series is Mega Man 2, which is always funny to hear that criticism because, well, let's just take their names and say them out loud with some suiting imagery. Waveman, Starman, Gyro Man, Napalm Man, Stone Man, and Charge, Crystal, and Gravity Man. Get your interest, at least for me. Now let's compare to Bubble Man, Air Man, Wood Man, Crash Man, Flash Man, Heat Man, Quick Man, Metal Man. Like, of course I'm not complaining about the names because it's like, how many different blank mans or women can there really be? On that note, they even held a contest for the Robot Master submissions and got a crazy amount of entrants. But just imagine if these names were on Mega Man 2, now imagine if these names were on Mega Man 5. How would you really feel? Boss names are sometimes a point of contention within the Mega Man discussion, and for those that choose to judge the book by its cover, at least do it with some consistency across the board. Choosing a stage looks and sounds great. Let's start with Crystal Man. So while we just covered what the first 3 Mega Man games did in terms of building up the series, it is important to add that Mega Man 4 added arguably his most iconic ability that he has, the Buster Charge Shot. So it took 4 NES entries to get him as developed as he is for this game. Gameplay wise, right away, there are things that we can't allow ourselves to take for granted. The controls are immediate, responsive, and perfect. Plus, always being able to slide and or charge your Buster as you run along allows your hands to stay quite busy, and they're just overall solid gameplay mechanics. Another thing we can't overlook or take for granted, graphics are really good. Capcom already showed by the second entry that they absolutely knew what they were doing with the hardware, so by the 5th, you can definitely expect that they won't let you down in that regard. Crystal Man Stage starts out above ground, but as you move along, there are several different backgrounds used. And when you're in the Crystal Caverns, you have a similar but slightly different effect as Flash Man or Gemini Man going on, which is a nice touch. In general, it looks and feels like something you'd expect from a Mega Man game. It's a nice blend between platforming, enemies, with some extended sections of both. It doesn't go without challenge, but doesn't necessarily overdo it. The music is alright, it's a different mood though than some of my favorites of the series, and I wish it did rock a bit harder. Getting to Crystal Man, he can be a bit tricky, especially at first, but when it comes to playing against any Robot Master, especially when you're just using your Buster, you've got to pay attention to what your openings are based on what your opponent can do, which is jump and shoot a single projectile or jump and release 4 bouncing projectiles, and you may soon realize that this guy doesn't ever run, so you'll find yourself just using the slide quite often to pass underneath and trying to use your space to punish soon after. Dodging everything is certainly easier said than done, but as long as you give yourself some space to work with, it's not that bad. And even if you're in a tough spot, they give you some E-Tank opportunities on the way here, which you could use if it gets down to it. Better mention that the weapon acquiring screen has a pretty hype tune with plenty of bass, plus Mega Man has a cool pseudo 3D spinning effect going on. Alright, who to take on next? Let's see what's going on with Charge Man. They immediately make the theme clear with a gigantic train behind you, which is pretty neat. But what's even more cool than that is how quickly you're on one yourself. Charge Man's theme is also more up-tempo, plus with the train track sound effect syncing with the little screen shake it does and scrolling background, they definitely put together a very fine stage. Better go ahead and mention, there is a single letter to grab in each of the 8 Robot Master stages, some being trickier than others. As we go through the levels, I definitely don't want each one to get too long-winded, but I can say that this one is nicely paced with solid enemy variety and an overall cool atmosphere. Talking about Charge Man, the whole theme of trains becomes quite clear. It's because he literally looks like a train, and he charges right at you. The track sounds and screen bumps continue throughout the fight, making you feel as if you're still really fighting him on a moving train. As usual, you may get smacked up your first try or two, and you'll figure out what's going on, but basically it's just a matter of getting out of the way when he charges at you, or when he fires out a few quickly falling projectiles. He has invincibility while he charges your way and when he shoots, so you'll want to get most out of your charge shots with those openings since it does 3 pegs of damage as opposed to 1. Okay, let's see who we should go up against next. Feeling something cool, let's try Gravity Man. So right off the bat, the arrows let us know that there's going to be some gravity switching going on here, and you know, that's pretty sweet. The music's pretty good, stage layout has some nice highlights with its design, and in general, it's just a fun, creative stage to play. Gravity Man himself is actually one of the Robot Masters I had the most problems with. In general, when going through these fights, I wanted to keep using the Buster to better assess just how these fights were designed as opposed to tearing right through them with their weakness. I didn't use a weakness against Gravity Man, although I was having a really hard time initially landing my shots and avoiding what he was doing. I'm sure it can be broken down to be made pretty simple, and as I look back, I probably should have slid more often to create more space. It's just distracting getting flipped between the ground and the ceiling. Although it only does 1 peg of damage, I did end up using the Crystal Man attack since the bouncing projectile made it a lot easier to get some hits in. The Buster can only make contact during the gravity swaps. Playing against and getting to learn these Robot Masters definitely has me pretty pumped for the Buster-only Robot Master difficulty list of the classic series, just like we covered for the Super Nintendo Mega Man X trilogy. I can definitely see it now. I'm sure the strategy at that point will be better use of the sliding and precisely timed charge shots in order to take this guy down. Something I need to mention really quickly, my play session for the next few bosses unfortunately had issues capturing the audio. But have no fear, after some quick YouTube to MP3 conversions, we will be able to at least listen to the OST for the few levels and boss fight, and I won't have the sound effects for just the next few levels. Now we're moving on to Stone Man. Basically, Stone Man's level reminds me a lot of a more developed and polished Guts Man level, at least as far as the aesthetics go. They get a lot of use out of these flying, projectile shooting enemies, along with the little classic helmet guys that do the same. Overall, it's a well put together level that isn't too frustrating. There's a lot to shoot down, they have some nice areas with combined platforming and enemies. They also have some cool spinning disc platforms that are pretty frequently used throughout multiple levels in Mega Man 5, and they get more use out of the rotational sprites that they put together. Mega Man 5 does have some bottomless pits and spikes throughout their levels, but I will say that they don't make it too tough for the player to avoid them. As I was playing this game, I definitely started to feel that the game was intentionally made just a bit easier than the toughest moments from the classic series that I remember. Something I make sure to do only after I play a game for a review, not before, is read about its legacy and reception, because you can't underestimate what it can do to your opinion, and even if you feel pretty self-aware of your own judgment, the power of placebo is infinitely relevant. With that being said, it now feels like a good time to mention that the lessened difficulty and increased approachability is something that had been noted a few times when looking at its reception around the time of its release. Speaking of not horribly difficult, Stone Man can be pretty simple to manipulate and take him down after just a try or two. He's another Robot Master that doesn't run first of all, plus keeping your distance is going to prevent him from hitting you with his ranged attack. The timing with him is landing your shots when he isn't invincible in his pile or during his Power Stone motion, but that's pretty much all there is going on here. I'll go ahead and mention now that his weapon is actually pretty useful when you're stuck on a ladder with a large enemy above or below you. I used it several times in this way throughout the rest of the game. Let's move on to our Vietnamese friend, Napalm Man. You may wonder why I would say something like that, but it's actually a thing, that the whole stage concept is one based around the Vietnam War. You're outside in the jungle setting with tiger-like robots, which are in Asia after all, and I better go ahead and mention, I believe this was one of the most difficult stages of the Robot Masters that I came across, only because I couldn't just keep firing and moving ahead like most of the other times. You actually have to charge your shot and hit those tigers because they really do some heavy damage. Aside from that, as you do go through the caverns, you'll definitely encounter just a bit more challenging platforming. If this was the first level that I selected, it would have given me an entirely different initial opinion on how difficult this game would be. And by the way, what's going on with these missiles that look identical to Patrick's Pinhead Larry face in SpongeBob? I can't unsee it. It's another solid level, just with a bit more challenge than I felt on the other stages. Like the pits and spikes were just harder to avoid, and it was also harder to avoid taking too much damage. And Napalm Man's theme is actually pretty awesome. By the way, they also made sure to display some tanks in the background, just as a final confirmation that their inspiration for this level was exactly what we already suspected. The fight with Napalm Man itself can actually be pretty challenging too, because his main attack of firing a couple of napalms where you're standing has a large explosion, but he also doesn't jump before they explode, so sometimes you can get trapped. If he catches you in the corner, you're almost guaranteed to be boned. Unfortunately, I decided to blow a couple E-tanks on this guy because he was just really kicking my butt, and it wasn't until later in the boss rush when I finally got a really good feel for the fight, which we'll be seeing clips of soon enough. Overall, it's a solid and somewhat challenging level with some great music. Just 3 more to go. Let's take to the sky with Gyro Man. Something that's pretty neat to start out is that you quickly get brought into the clouds as opposed to just appearing there, and that's a pretty cool touch. The level's aesthetic is pretty similar to Airman's, but yeah, they make some nice use of the sky theme and solid platforming sections, and it's just a continuation of well put together but not absurdly hard Mega Man action. The more challenging parts come from running on the falling blocks, which could give you some issues with those dive-bombing enemies to go along with it. The even more deadly part though is scrolling upward through those spikes. There are definitely a few points where you have to be careful with the precision and height of your jumps, because one wrong move and you're getting sent back at the start of those falling blocks again. Gyro Man himself is a pretty cool fight that brings something different to the table. He hides in the clouds above that obscure your vision. First his propeller comes out, and shortly after, him too. And with how they work, it can be tricky to avoid them. Using charge shots would have been a good idea, but you know what, I decided to use the gravity power just to avoid the game over on my last life, and wow, the gravity weapon totally destroys this guy, even when he's in the clouds and not near you. So you can see just how ridiculously easy things get when abusing a Robot Master's weakness, especially for Gyro Man. Just one more Robot Master without the in-game sounds, and it's Starman. It kind of plays like Bubble Man's level, to be honest, with its moon jump physics going on. The music even has a feeling of loneliness and isolation to it, which is pretty neat, and also starts out with a meteor shower. So overall, pretty cool start to the level. As far as your jumping goes, I've always thought that it's a pretty fun change-up when platformers do this, and the new level design around your changed abilities are simply well put together. It's screen after screen of thoughtfully placed enemies and instant kill spikes that absolutely test your ability to adjust to your new floaty controls. It's overall not super tough, staying in line with most of the levels we've seen so far, just a bit challenging, but nothing super unfair or frustrating at all. You do have to be careful though, otherwise you will absolutely pay the price. So Starman has a similar weapon to a couple others that we've seen in the series that began with Woodman's Leaf Shield. The fight with him is honestly pretty fun. It tests your ability in getting around his large star ring throws and making the most of those openings. He's always jumping and could basically release the star shield at any point, but it comes out pretty slow, giving you reasonable time to avoid it and then return fire. They definitely could have made this more challenging with a spike ceiling like with Bubble Man, but hey, they were clearly going for a more approachable entry in this series, and that's honestly what they've been able to do so far. And by the way, we're finally about to get the in-game music back, and for the first time ever, I'm happy that my game froze, otherwise I wouldn't have rebooted another session with the audio working. Just one more Robot Master to go. Let's take on Waveman. So we've heard some good and okay songs up to this point, but in my opinion, I think we really did save the best for last. I'm sure some of you guys can relate to this feeling, but sometimes when I hear or see something really special, I basically feel nostalgia for it, even if it's not necessarily from my past. It doesn't happen very often, but this song absolutely gives me all of those feelings. And although it doesn't rock super hard, it's such a delightful tune that I don't even mind. There's something just so pure and joyful about the melody, it almost brings a tear to my eye, honestly. We gotta listen to it. Waveman Stage definitely has some cool things going for it, aside from some more solidly paced out enemies and platforming, plus a little bubble platforming test. We actually get a pretty darn solid water riding vehicle section that lasts a good 90 seconds. Not only does it have some really fun challenge with its 3 different enemies that come with their various speeds, patterns, and directions, but we even get a mid-level boss here that plays very nicely as well. As you can tell, I like this level. It's got nice variety, challenge, and a really, really nice song to go along with it. Facing off against Waveman, our last Robot Master fight, for now anyway. It took me a little bit to get the hang of him, with his water spout that comes out of the ground to do damage, plus blocks your shots. Then he follows it with his own harpoon shot, and then a jump toward you. So it's a pretty basic pattern, but dodging those things and getting your shots in is easier said than done. And I'll be honest, I didn't even beat him with the Buster until later, and decided I didn't want to get sent back again. But hey, it's another example of just how absurdly easy a boss fight becomes if you use their weakness. If you spam the attack, it's basically like a pass right through it, for just about any of the Robot Master fights out there. And just like that, we're through all 8 Robot Master fights, and overall, there's absolutely some real quality to be had with the stage design, enemies, and boss fights. Not to mention, we came away with a handful of songs that I would definitely listen to on their own, and some nice looking levels too. Now it's time to tackle our first castle. And let me tell you, it was very apparent that the levels were going to be tougher from here on out. I died several times before getting to the boss, and the worst part of it was just how far they'd send you back. Definitely a bit of an endurance feel, at least for me. But hey, it's another pretty looking level, and speaking of songs that I would listen to on their own, I love what they have going on with this track. Super catchy. Despite us being through the 8 Robot Masters, you might be surprised with how much further we have to go. In fact, they happen to use this track with 4 levels of this first castle, and it would take quite a while to talk through another 8 levels and each of those boss fights, so you know what? How about we just jam out while I show them to you? Overall, the first castle had some new and interesting level designs. The music is one extended hit track, and the Dark Man fights that change between the stages, that seem to evolve just a bit more and more, are all really solid fights, and deliver on some more of that Robot Master fighting action. Once we get through this first imposter Proto Man's castle, you may already expect what's coming next. You know it, Dr. Wily's castle. And guess what? We have a new song to jam out with 4 more levels to plow, with some big bosses, the Robot Master rush to handle as well, all before Dr. Wily. Let's do this. Alright, so we're finally to Dr. Wily. Let's talk about how this final fight plays. It's a really short level leading up to it, but basically you've got a big skull tank-like vehicle that can do a few things. It can draw you in with air suction, pops out missiles that target your position, shoot out a bouncing ball, or making contact with you while it moves left to right. I like to compliment that the sprite art is great, and little details like moving parts within the sprite can't be taken for granted. If nothing else, we can at least say that Mega Man 5 is sufficiently polished. The second form is a bit more frustrating, unless you've got the most game-breaking item there is, which we aren't going to use because it robs the boss and the late game in general of all of its challenge. Remember those 8 letters from earlier? If you can collect those, you get this robo-bird named Beat that dives into your enemies, even when it's the final boss that you can't see between his transportation. Taking him on without Beat is another animal entirely. But as long as you get here with a couple E-tanks, it doesn't have to be that bad at all. It's just a slog with how often he's not at a proper height for you to hit. It's a solid final boss though. Definitely draws itself out, and unless you used Beat, you at least feel like you had to earn your victory. So finally, to answer the question, Mega Man 5, it's expensive, but is it good? You know what, it really is. Just because it's not as iconic with quite the same heavy-hitting soundtrack or memorable challenge as the first trilogy doesn't mean it sucks, it's good, and furthermore, it's the most approachable Mega Man game that I've played in regard to its consciously more mild difficulty. Don't think that means I'm calling it easy, because it's not like you can just show up and win, but you probably won't find yourself hitting your head against the wall as you try to make it through this one, which isn't always a bad thing. As always guys, I just want to thank you for watching. I'm curious to know, what's your favorite Mega Man game? Any surprises you had when playing through this series yourself? I look forward to seeing what you think, and I also look forward to seeing you on the 30th for the next 16-bit review. And I hope you have a great rest of your day.